Okay. We'll remember the Alter Rebbe is making the following case, the following argument. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that the godly soul, the divine soul, is none other than an actual piece of Hashem from on high. And the Alter Rebbe brought for us three analogies, three examples, which is really a three-stepped argument to explain the connection, the bond, the deep oneness that exists between the soul of a Jew. We're talking about the divine soul that's added on top of the elemental soul. Every human being has the elemental soul, but only a Jew has a divine soul. What were the three arguments that the Alter Rebbe brought? The three arguments were, number one, it says in Torah that Hashem blew the soul of life into Adam. Blowing comes from a much deeper place than speaking. All of creation, including the holiest and the highest and the angels and everything else, is a product of Hashem's speaking, which is a very external level of breath. But the soul of man, that's the product of the level of breathing, which is a very deep and intense energy from a human being, from man. And that's one example, that's the first explanation, that it means that Hashem expresses the soul, the divine soul in the Jew from a very, very deep place inside of himself, as expressed in the words, V'ato nofachta bi, you blew, you infused the Jewish soul into me through blowing. That was the first argument. The second argument was that the Jewish people arose in Hashem's thought. Yes? Thought of the three garments of the soul, thought is the most internal. Thought is actually called the garment that you cannot remove from the soul. Other garments you can remove from the soul. A human being does not have to act. A human being can sit in one place and do nothing. A human being does not have to speak. A human being can close his mouth and not say anything. But a human being cannot cease to think. The mind is a rushing river. The thought, the garment of thought is one with the soul. And when it says that the Jewish people arose in Hashem's thought, it means that it comes from a place that's unified with the essence. But more, the Alter Rebbe says, more. Let's understand this statement that the Jewish people, the Jewish soul, the divine spark, is rooted in the divine thought, as meaning that the Jewish soul is rooted in the divine essence. That means Hashem himself. How could it mean that? Well, it could mean that because we are called bonim, children to Hashem. Just as, according to Kabbalah, children are rooted in the minds of the parents, the reproductive material that parents emit that forms the child is rooted in the essence of the mind of the parent. Therefore, by Hashem also, if Hashem is calling the Jewish people children, that means that the soul of every Jew is derived from the essence of the divine, from Hashem himself. How does that link? How does that jive with what we just said, that the Jewish people arose in Hashem's thoughts? Answer, Ki loi machshavosai machshavosechem, because Hashem's thoughts is not our thoughts. Our thoughts, as we learned from the sources last week, our thoughts are separate from us. Our process of developing a thought is very different than the way it is by Hashem. When a human being is thinking, there is the person's soul, the essence of the person themselves. And then there is the power of intellect, or the power to comprehend. And then there is the subject matter, that which is known. We experience, when we are thinking, we're experiencing three different items coming together to create the experience of human thought. Hashem is not that way. Hashem functions in a manner of absolute oneness and unity. He and his ability to think and the thought itself, they are all completely one, together, unified, and it is all Hashem's essence. It's just Hashem, no garments, no levels, no layers, no additions, no additives, just Hashem himself. So when we say that the Jewish soul is rooted in Hashem's thoughts, it means Hashem himself. And that's why we could be called Banim Atem La Hashem Elekechem. You are children to Hashem, your God, because we, the Jewish people, have a soul that's rooted in the very essence of the divine, not in any level or layer of the spiritual cosmos. Now we move on to the obvious question. The obvious question is, we have among the Jewish people countless levels. As many Jews as there are, that's how many levels of soul there are. This we know from the writings of the Arizal. I did not find an electronic version that I could copy into our sources, so unfortunately I don't have it for you. But the Alter Rebbe brings the basic idea here. He says, "V'af sheyesh rivevois minei chilukei madregos b'neshames gavoya me'al gavoya li'en ketz." True, there are so many different gradations of souls. We're talking about neshames, level on top of level, rank on top of rank, without end. Kemoi, for example, Goydel Mailas Nishmeis Ha'aves, so Moshe Rabbeinu Alei HaMashalim, the souls of the patriarchs and of Moshe Rabbeinu, who are far superior compared to the souls of our own generation, Al Nishmeis Dereseinu Eile De Ikvei Meshicha, which our generation is called the heels of Mashiach. Why is our generation called the heels of Mashiach? Says the Alter Rebbe, Shehem Bechinas Akevayim Mamish Legabe Moyach Shev, because our generation's souls are literally like the heels of the souls of previous generations that are compared to us, they would be like the heads. So let's take a look at some sources that we can find, that we have found, and this will be the beginning of our journey into the second portion of chapter 2, the discussion about how is it possible that if every Jewish soul is a piece of Hashem himself, every Jewish soul is rooted in the essence of the divine, how could there be some souls that are very, very in tune with godliness, some souls that are keenly aware of Hashem's desire for them, instructions for them, Hashem's feelings towards them, Hashem's response to their behavior and their role in Hashem's master plan. And then there are others who have the same spark of the essence of the divine in their souls, and they're absolutely callous. They're absolutely callous to godliness, to holiness, to Torah and mitzvahs. That's the emotional part of the question. Or the homiletical part of the question. The essential, the scholarly part of the question is, if every soul is rooted in the same place, how are they expressed in the ultimate production so very, very differently? There's a medrash in Tanchuma that reads as follows. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe leimer. This is from Parshas Kisisa. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Re'ei, see, Karasi b'Shem, I have called by name Betzalel. And he was the young man that was meant to oversee the construction of the Mishkan, the traveling temple in the desert, and all of its beautiful furniture. Omar Shloime. As a commentary to this, King Shloime HaMelech, King Solomon said in Koheles, which is known as Ecclesiastes, he says the following, Masha hoyo, whatever happens in the world, kvar nikra shmoi, it's already been named. Hashem knew about it from the beginning, from before time even began. V'noida asher hu adam, and Hashem knows exactly what the future of man will be. Says the Medrash, a commentary, by attaching another pasuk to it, Zeh sha'amar HaKosav, this is the meaning of the verse, Ki po'al v'yasa koirei hadoros meirosh. Hashem mi po'al v'yasa kaire hadeiros mereish. Who is the one that caused all of this? Who is the one that made all of this? The one who predicted all the generations from the beginning. What does this mean? What does this mean? What are we describing about a prediction of generations from the beginning? Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says, this is the Medrash now commenting on all of this. Misha hiskanti meresh, from the beginning of time, when I decreed that there should be lasises mishkan, the construction of a traveling temple for me in the desert, kvar karasi loishem, I have already announced his name way back in the beginning, before time. V'noida asher hu adam, and that's why it says, I know who is the man that's going to be doing this, who is the offshoot of Adam Harishon, the descendant of Adam Harishon that's going to be tasked with the job of building for me the Mishkan. What does it mean that Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur Lamati Yehuda is an offshoot of Adam Harishon? Says the Medrash as follows: She'Adam Harishon mutal go'elam, when Adam, the first man, was still laying on the ground, a pile of clay. Her Oloi HaKadosh Baruch Hu kol tzadik v'tzadik she'omed mizarei. Hashem introduced him to every righteous person who would arise from among his descendants. Yesh shetolei beroshai. Some of the tzaddikim were hanging on his head. V'yesh tolei b'se'orei, and some of the tzaddikim, the holy men that would arise among his descendants, were hanging from his hair. V'yesh b'tzavorei, and others were hanging from his neck. V'yesh b'shtei einov, some were hanging from his eyes. V'yesh b'chotmai, some were on his nose. V'yesh b'fiv, some from his mouth. V'yesh b'yoznov, some from his ears. V'yesh b'zeroyoi, some from his arms. Teidalach, this is the principle. Based on this principle, it happened that when Eov wanted to argue and say that Hashem was treating him unjustly, if I would be able to know where to find him, if I could just come to the place where he rests, I would hold a court case in front of him, and I would argue with him to show him that I was wrong, to show him that he is wrong. I would know the words which he would answer me, and I would understand what he would say to me. Heshivai, his answer was, the answer of his friends then, what would be the answer of Hashem to Eov on such an occasion when he says, I know that I'm right, let me just argue my case? Hashem says to Eov, where were you when I founded the earth? What is the argument? What is that defense? Amar Reish Lakish, Eifa Ksiv. Omar Loi, what it means is, he said to him, Heichan ha'isa Eifa shelcha be'adam harishon. Where was your root? Where were you suspended in the body of Adam Harishon? Were you in his head? Were you in his hair? Were you on his neck, his eyes? Which organ of Adam Harishon are you connected to? The Arizal explains that Adam Harishon and every subsequent soul after Adam Harishon is lined up in the order of the levels of creation. Some souls are associated with the higher levels. Some souls are associated with the medium levels. Some souls are associated with the lower levels. But all of the souls derive from the soul of Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon's soul is called an neshama klolis. It's a collective soul, and it is the primary collective soul. In it, he includes every soul of every Jew that would ever be. In fact, every human being that would ever be is rooted in Adam Arishan, but particularly the divine souls of every Jew is rooted in the divine soul of Adam Arishan, that treasure that Hashem gave him when he blew strongly into his nostrils. And depending on which organ in Adam Harishan, meaning which spiritual level in Adam Harishan your soul comes from, your soul is rooted in, that will determine the spiritual talents of your neshama, of your soul, the spiritual potency of your neshama. In another sefer, which I was able to find a digital text, it's called Shar HaPsukim for the Arizal, it's among his writings. In Parsha Bereshis, Dirush Gimel, it says, Vihine, Keshenoilad kol tzadik v'tzadik ba'olam hazeh, as every tzaddik is born into this world, Hinehu Eiver Peratim Eiveri Adam Harishan. Each tzaddik that is born represents a specific limb of Adam, the first man. And when this tzaddik will be completed and will perfect everything that he has to perfect in this world, in terms of transforming darkness into light, correcting broken vessels that cannot contain holiness into perfected vessels that can contain holiness, when the tzaddik has done everything he must do, and he has in that way corrected and perfected his own soul, that helps to correct and to perfect Adam, the first man himself, from the damage that he caused in his own soul by the sin that he did from eating from the tree of knowledge. The one example, even Moshe Rabbeinu, who is also known as Bechir HaNivroyim, Mivchar HaNivroyim, the choicest of all the creations, which is important to know because Adam Harishan, Adam the first man, is called Mivchar HaNivroyim, the choicest of all the creations. Then, so when Moshe Rabbeinu, so that's why he says even Moshe Rabbeinu is included in the soul of Adam Harishan. Kasher Moshe zocha bohem v'tiknam, when Moshe Rabbeinu merited to correct and perfect his portion of this world and his spiritual powers, his soul, certainly Adam Harishan himself was also perfected and corrected through the work of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu, in fact, was able to correct and to perfect the blemishes of Adam Harishan to a greater degree than anybody before him and anybody after him, because he was also on the level of called Bechir HaNivroyim, Mivchar HaNivroyim, the choicest of the nations. Now, this here, the Medrash and the Arizal, we're talking about tzaddikim. So it's not clear that we're talking about every single Jew. And therefore, we'll bring one more text to emphasize this idea that every single Jewish soul is rooted in Adam Harishan, not just the tzaddikim, because that's the argument the Alter Rebbe is making. We know we have tzaddikim. Tzaddikim are the souls that are on the highest level, but what about the simple people? So for this reason, we'll bring a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, same author, from Likutei Torah, the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim. He says like this: Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. You are standing firm, standing tall here, all of you. Says the Rebbe, Hine Parsha Zu Kedim Le'elam Kedim Rosh Hashanah. This parsha is always read every year, just before Rosh Hashanah. Umerumaz b'milas Hayom Tekoy al Rosh Hashanah. Because when the verse says you are standing here today, it's an indication that this lecture that Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jewish people actually took place on Rosh Hashanah. Because there's parallel language, there's matching language in that verse and in the verse that describes the actual power of the day of Rosh Hashanah. This day is the beginning of all your works, Hashem. We're talking about Rosh Hashanah. Now, what does it mean we are all standing there together? Shekol nitzotzei nishames, because all the sparks of the souls, nitzavim, are standing upright. Umisa'alim b'mekeiram, and they rise up. They receive an elevation. They experience an elevation in B'Mekeiran Harishan, in their original source, B'Yom Zeh, on that day of Rosh Hashanah, Ad Lifnei Havaya. They rise up so that they could stand literally in the presence of the essence of the divine Hashem himself. Who, Rasheichem Shiftechem, and the verse goes on to list all the categories of the Jewish people, Rasheichem Shiftechem, until Mechoite Veitzacho Ad Shoyev Memecha, from your wood choppers to your water carriers. And that verse counts 10 categories of Jewish people. 10 categories of Jewish people are listed in that sentence that describes the Jewish people standing and listening to the speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, why are the Jewish people divided into 10 categories? Eser madreges shekimoi sheyesh eser madreges benefesh ha'adam, because just as there are 10 levels in the soul of man, dahainu gimel sichliim, 3 intellectual levels, v'zayin midos, and 7 emotional levels. Of course, we'll talk about this in future chapters. We'll lay it all out and describe it, but for now, we're still at the essence of the soul. We're still discussing the soul itself before we get to the breakdown of what exactly the soul has in it and what its tools are. In the soul, there are 10 powers. 3 of them are intellectual, 7 of them are emotional or instinctive. Kach hine kol Yisrael, so too is every Jew. All the Jewish people together, him koimo achas shlema. They are one complete person, one complete body. And throughout Hasidus, this is the language that is brought up over and over whenever the question of unity is being discussed. Koima achas shlema, kol Yisrael, all the Jewish people are koima achas shlema, are one collective body. Uklalos nishmeisehem, and the collective spirit of their souls is called Nikra Knesses Yisrael, is called the congregation of Israel. Shenechelekes le'eser madreges. Knesses Yisrael is divided into 10 levels, and that's why we have 10 degrees, 10 categories of Jewish people listed in that verse describing the Jewish people standing in front of Moshe and listening to his lecture. Ubereish Hashanah mis'alim kol hamadreges. On Rosh Hashanah, every level of Jewish soul is experiencing an elevation. Even the simplest among us, who are called woodcutters and water carriers, which they are relatively the lowest levels. But on Rosh Hashanah, every level of Jew experiences an elevation, experiences a ascent. V'zehu, and that's the meaning of Vayihi b'shurun melech b'hisasef rashayam yachad shiftei Yisrael. All the Jewish people are able to gather together. Shekulam misasfim yachad lias la'achadim ki'echad. All the levels of the Jewish people gather together so that they can all be unified as one. Ki, because zehu klal gadol. This is an important principle in the relationship and in the perspective we ought to have when we ask a question, when we are considering a fellow Jew. The kol the asim misita de kedusha. The rule is anything that's on the side of holiness, whom is a circle. Holiness is a circle. There really isn't a top and a bottom. There really isn't a beginning and an end in the inner workings of things that are holy. Instead, holiness works in rings or circles. Because it comes from the level of light, which we have not had an opportunity to discuss yet, and we will in future chapters. It's the level of light that is encompassing. Encompassing means it's around. Let's say you have a snow globe, and let's pretend it was a real ball, or you have a marble, and inside the marble is a little figurine, a little doll. The marble covers the head of the doll and the arms of the doll and the feet of the doll equally. So too, there is a light from Hashem that interacts with every creation individually on its level. That's a lower level of light. But there is a greater light from Hashem. The true light of creation really engages with every creation and every level of creation equally, with the same intensity, with the same openness, with the same acceptance, with the same non-judgmental attitude, not judging if they're big or small, great or insignificant. And since the Jewish people are rooted in that level of light from Hashem, in the true level of creation, therefore, therefore the system of the Jewish soul, the Jewish spirit, is circular in nature. It's not linear. It's not that there are some that are high and some that are low, and the ones that are low need the ones that are high, but the ones that are high don't need the ones that are low. That's only in a linear system. The Jewish soul system is not linear. It is circular. And therefore, let's look at the last two lines of the Maimer. The Lachin Amr Razal, therefore, the sages have taught us, Havei shfal ruach b'pnei kol adam. Be humble before any Jew. Lefi sheyesh b'chol echad v'echad, because in each and every Jew, there is bechinas u'madreigas, there are levels and there are items, mashe'ein bechaverei, that the fellow Jew does not have. The kulon tzrichin zeh lo zeh, and each one needs, each one requires, each one is dependent on the other. In other places, we will learn that as much as the tzaddikim and the heads of the generation are needed by the simple souls of the generation. We are going to learn that in our chapter, maybe today, maybe later. We're going to learn that in our chapter. But in other places, it's very, very clear. Without the simple folk, without the pure-hearted, simple-faithed Jews, the leaders of the generation do not experience growth in their own spirituality. This is the value of having all of the Jewish people as part of one body. Kol Yisrael heim koimo achas shlema. That the heads of the generation help to lead the generation. They help to give direction to the generation. They help to conduct the affairs of the generation. But it is the simple Jews that are like the hands and the feet of the generation that actually carry out the mission for which Hashem created that generation, and they help to elevate not just themselves, the so to speak, lowly Jewish people, but they also are able to elevate the hearts and minds of the collective Jewish spirit. Those are the tzaddikim and the Talmidei Chachamim that are leading the generation. This then is the picture that the Alter Rebbe is painting for us about the Jewish souls and the fact that there are so many levels. And of course, we come back to the question, since every single Jewish soul is rooted in the essence of the divine, in Hashem himself, how could there be so many gradations? How could there be so many different levels? Are we not all the same? The language that the Rebbe used to describe our generations, which is actually his generation, the generation of the Alter Rebbe, he called it the generation of Ikvese de Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, which is it comes from the Gemara in Soita, and the quote is there, Be'ikves Mashiach chutz b'yasgi. It says, in the times of the approach of Mashiach, he calls it the Ikves, the heels of Mashiach, impudence will increase. And Rashi comments, what is Ikves HaMashiach, the heels of Mashiach? It means the Soif HaGolus Lifnei Bias Mashiach, at the end of Golus, just before Mashiach arrives. We have souls that are on the level of heels and feet. Why? What's telling about the fact that we're calling this generation heels and feet? We have in the sources of Chazal where it's described that the heel does not contain any intelligence. Other limbs, other organs have, you can see it in the limb or in the organ that it has intelligence. Some of the intelligence of the mind actually lives permanently in that organ, in that limb. For example, your hands. Your hands have their own memory. Your feet have their own memory. The muscles on your back They have their own memory. Your hands remember how to play the piano. Your hands remember how to write letters. Your hands remember how to do things, how to accomplish tasks without additional training and without the brain having to think through every step. The back helps you to maintain your balance and how to walk. Your legs also, you know how to walk and maintain balance. Some people have developed the skills in their feet and in their toes to be able to sew clothing and close buttons and lift up things and type on the typewriter. Chazal say the heel is the exception. The heel has no muscle memory. There's no intelligence in just the heel. We're not talking about the toes. We're not talking about the sole of the feet. We're talking about just the heel. The heel, says Chazal, the sages say, it's just leather. And therefore, compared to the mind, which is incredibly human and incredibly powerful and valuable, in comparison to that, the heel is like, you could make the same comparison, like an animal compared to a human being. So there are generations, there are people whose souls are so insensitive, are so unfeeling about things that are associated with godliness, that they are called the heels of the Jewish people. Somebody has to be the heel. If the Jewish people are, Kol Yisrael Heim Koimo Achas Shleimo, all the Jewish people are one collective body, a complete body. No part is missing. Then there has to be among the Jewish people some whose souls will be on the level of the heel. Very unfeeling, very callous, very muted experience of divinity, of godliness. How is it possible then? Mikol Mokim, says the Alter Rebbe. I'm sorry. This, this phenomenon of different levels in Jewish souls is true across the years of Jewish history. That's first of all. We know that the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the 12 tribes, and the generation under Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, these are the great minds and hearts. These are the leaders in terms of spirit, the leading souls of our people across the generations. Our generations are more muted. The generations, as we get closer and closer to Mashiach, we are called Ikvei Meshicha, or Ikvesa de Meshicha, because the sensitivity towards holiness and godliness is getting more and more dimmed, more and more muted. So across the span of history, you have the generations that were powerful, like the hearts and minds of the body, and then you have generations that are very muted, like the heels of the body. But in each generation, independently, you also have this Koimo Achas Shleimo, the full body of the Jewish people, where you have, that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying now, V'chein b'chol dor v'dor, so too in every individual generation. Yesh Roshei Alfei Yisrael, there are the heads of the thousands of the Jewish people. I think that's borrowed from the Chumash. In the Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law suggests that he divide up the responsibility of leadership among the Jewish people, among the Jewish elders. And he says you should appoint heads of the thousands, heads of the 500s, heads of the hundreds, heads of the 50s, heads of the tens. Sari alafim, sari meis, sari chamishim, sari asores. Roshei Alfei Yisrael means the heads of the thousands of the Jewish people, but it means generally the leaders of the Jewish people, the community leaders, she nishmeisehem, whose souls are b'chinas reishu moyach. Why are they the leaders of the generation? Why are they called the heads of the Jewish people? Because they are giving instruction, because they were appointed to an important office? No. Well, yes, but why were they appointed? They were appointed because that role corresponds properly to the root of their soul, to the level of their neshama. Because their souls are in the category of heads or brains in comparison to the rest of the Jewish people. So not only across the years do we have different levels of souls, but in every generation we have different levels of souls. All of this amplifying the question that the Alter Rebbe is asking: if we're all rooted in the same place, how could there be so many different iterations of the same spirit of the same soul? To emphasize the question even more so, we know the chein nefashos legabe nefashos. Not only are the generations different in the levels of neshama, and not only is the Jewish people across all of history different in the levels of neshama, but the neshama itself, the souls themselves, can be different, because because every soul is made up of various levels. There is nefesh. A person could function fully on the level of nefesh. Ruach, a person could function fully on the nefesh, on the level of ruach. There's neshama. A lucky person can function fully on the level of neshama. And I encourage all of us, all of you, to go back and listen to my father's introductory lecture where he described this at some length. So some human beings, some Jews, and this the Kabbalah says as well, the Zohar says, the Arizal says, I think it's from the Zohar. Anyway, that a person is born and he functions on the level of nefesh, the lowest one. It's simply the spirit of his body, the life of his body. He functions like a mensch. He can move his hands, he can eat, he can kick his feet, he can do whatever he has to do physically, and in order to function as a human being on the most basic level. If he is worthy, because he uses his hands and feet and his ability of locomotion, to do mitzvahs and to serve Hashem and to refine himself, then he will be blessed to function on the level of ruach. His own spirit of ruach will be infused into his conscious life, and then he will be able to develop emotions towards Hashem. He'll be able to develop strong feelings for Torah, for mitzvahs, for Jewish people, and for holiness. He can develop a sincere disgust, hopefully, at least to a degree. Okay, really, that takes tremendous intellectual capacity, intellectual ability to develop a proper disgust for unholiness. But the more a person refines themselves, the more of their own neshama they are able to receive. So some people will live their whole life only on the level of nefesh. And it has also something to do with the very basic nature of their neshama. They just don't have the spiritual capacity to grow. They just don't. Some people will be lucky enough to rise to the level of ruach. Some people will be lucky enough to rise to the level of neshama. Extra special people will live on the level of chaya yechida, but those people, those are very special people. Again, this emphasizes the question: if we're all rooted in the same place, how come there are so many different categories? How come there are so many different levels? Not only are some souls of the level of neshama more keenly sensitive to holiness, and some are less, but some Jews don't even have the level of neshama. And you're going to say that every Jew is rooted in the same place? The answer is, of course, absolutely, yes. That's exactly what we've been saying, and there's no need to change even one iota what we've been saying. Mikol Mokim, says the Rebbe, Shoresh kol hanefesh ruach neshama kulam. Every level of nefesh, from the crassest to the finest, every level of ruach, from the most sensitive to the most impudent, and every level of neshama, from the most lofty, spiritually pure, to the densest, what we're calling the heels of the Jewish people, they are all meirosh kol hamadregas, from the highest of the levels, ad soif kol dargin, until the very, very lowest of all the levels. They are all what? Nimshach mimoyach ha'elyon. They all come from the supernal mind, moyach ha'elyon, and which is also known as Chochma Ilah. Different Kabbalah Sfarim describe this level of Hashem's own thoughts, as we said. Yisrael alu b'machshava. The Jewish people arose in Hashem's thoughts, in Hashem's mind, which means, as the Alter Rebbe translated it, it means the essence of the divine. But it begins in Chachma. It begins its transmission from the Creator himself into the created being, into the soul of a human being, into the Jewish person, into the Jewish body. It all begins in this level of Hashem's thoughts, called Chachma Ilah, or Moichin Iloy, Moyach HaElyon. The Zohar calls it Chachma Ilah. The Eitz Chaim calls it Moyach HaElyon. Supernal thoughts, or supernal mind, supernal wisdom. And it doesn't matter what level a person finds themselves on, they are in fact rooted deeply in the essence of the divine through this level called Chachma Ilah. Now, wait a minute. Knowing that there are gradations of souls, we have to understand how that happened. How is it that from the same single source, you have so many different kinds of souls that emerge? The answer the Alter Rebbe will give through the use of the analogy of the development of a fetus in the womb. We can learn it, we can understand it from the analogy of the child that's developed from the DNA material of the parents. The surprise is, says the Alter Rebbe, that we would understand, as we learned in Kabbalah, the material, the DNA material that produces the body of the child and the whole being of the child is rooted in the minds of the parents. Then it would make sense that the mind of the child should be rooted in the minds of the parents. The surprise is that even the hair and even the fingernails on the toes, the toenails, also come from that same mind material, the same essential DNA material that comes from the minds of the parents, and everything in between. How does it happen that such valuable, high, lofty material should become so crass and so low and so debased that it should become the toenails of the baby? How does it happen? Of course, we know the answer. Through the gestation of the child for 9 months in the womb of the mother. The yardam imadrego lemadrego, and it descends this incredibly powerful material that comes from the minds of the parents. The father gives, in spiritual terms, the father gives the 5 kindnesses, the hei chasadim, and the mother gives the hei gevures, the five severities that together make up the combination that you need in order to develop a human being, and it's from the essence of the parents. Yet in the 9 months of gestation, it descends from its powerful, incredible state of essential intellectual material, and it descends to become even every part of the body, even the fingernails, which the sages have told us, the fingernails only develop in the 9th month, spiritually. Spiritually, that's true, no matter what happens with each individual fetus, because it's true about the soul as well. What happens with the soul? The soul enters the process of gestation, and we've learned this about various tzaddikim, and we're going to learn this about the neshama of every human being, the neshama of every Jew specifically, that the soul also goes through a process of gestation, a pregnancy period. It's well known that tzaddikim, the real holy tzaddikim, whose bodies are transformed to holiness during their lifetimes, we're talking about tzaddikim like Eliyahu Hanavi, tzaddikim like the Baal Shem Tov, the patriarchs, their gestation period was 12 months instead of 9. Of course, we're talking about spiritually. such a holy person, the soul needs to take a longer journey down because it's coming from a much higher place. What happens in these 9 months of gestation of the soul? The soul is descending through the 10 levels, of the created worlds. First from Chokhmah, it descends out of Chokhmah. That's where it's rooted. It's rooted in Chokhmah. And it descends in Bina. That's after 1 month. It experiences a contraction. And then it goes to Das, which is another contraction, a second contraction, then a third contraction to Chesed, fourth contraction to Gevura, fifth contraction to Tiferes, sixth contraction to Netzach, a seventh contraction to Hoid, eighth contraction to Yesod, and finally a ninth contraction to Malchus when it enters the body of the child. 9 months, 9 contractions, 9 descents, and what happens in the ninth? At every level, the appropriate and corresponding portions of the baby's body are formed. The fingernails appear only physically and spiritually only in the 9th month. Or in other words, only after the completion of the spiritual descent. So the fingernails or the toenails, they literally are the lowest in the sense of spiritual material. They are the lowest. Physically also they're the lowest. You could cut it off and it doesn't hurt. When Adam and Chava sinned with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Hashem made them a garment to reflect their now newly debased, disgusting. No, backwards. When Adam and Chava were in the garden, they had a garment of nails, of fingernails. The whole garment was made of fingernails. Why? Says the Arizal in his writings, the nails are from unholiness. The nails, fingernails, are where holiness has descended so low that it could give life even to unholiness. Another way to describe it is, this is the scaly skin of a snake. Why is the skin of a snake scaly? Fingernails. Where the spirit of life has descended so low that it could actually have holiness, giving life and sustaining something that's unholy. That's the fingernails. We have souls that are on such a low level. Jewish souls that are on such a low level. How did it happen if they are all coming from the supernal mind of God himself, the essence of the divine? The answer is gestation. Just as there is physical gestation, so is there spiritual gestation. Some of this divine intellectual material, the light of Hashem's wisdom, will descend through one contraction and stop and become a brilliant, bright soul that leads the Jewish people. Even the soul of Mashiach is rooted in Bina. Bina is the second level. Chokhmah is on top. That's the source of the soul. Bina in Kabbalah is called Leah. Leah, like Yaakov's wife, Leah. Bina is Leah. It's the supernal conscious mind, not the supernal subconscious mind. That's Chokhmah. Leah is Bina. Leah is the mother of Mashiach. Right? Because Mashiach is from the tribe of Yehuda. Yehuda is a child of Leah. The soul of Mashiach is rooted in Bina. So those souls, they went through one contraction and stopped. And from there they emerged into the world. Powerful, mighty souls, leaders of the Jewish people. And so on it goes. Various souls descend through the various levels. And of course, in every level, there are levels of gradations and gradations and gradations. Some of the souls descend all the way down to the level of spiritual toenails. And it's all from the same source, and we should not be confused by the fact that some souls and some Jews are powerfully spiritual, some Jews are naturally holy, and some Jews are naturally callous and insensitive to holiness. But we are still rooted in the divine wisdom of Hashem himself. And there's an important message, there's a powerful, powerful message we must not forget. And that is, we'll continue in the analogy of the development of a fetus to take home a very encouraging and important message from the Alter Rebbe. Ve'im kol zeh, nevertheless, oidena kshura u'miyuchedes b'yichud nifla, the soul is still completely bound up in an amazing bond b'mahusa v'atzmusa harishon, with its original form, what it used to be in the beginning, shahoisa tipas moyach ha'av, the soul of every single Jew, even the one that descended to become the toenails of the Jewish people, is still incredibly bonded and united with the soul, the spirit of life from Hashem's own essence. That's called the divine soul. It's still connected with what it was in the beginning, the light of Hashem's own wisdom, the Yisrael alu b'machshava, that spark of the Jew that arose in Hashem's own mind, so to speak. Of course, in the analogy, we're saying that the nails are still deeply rooted in the DNA, still deeply rooted in the original material, right? To the point where you can take a piece of DNA, even one shred, and you could reform the entire body, intelligence down to toenails. But in the spiritual sense, the soul, even of the lowest Jew, even the most callous Jew, still, even the way it is expressed into the body and life of even the most spiritually insensitive and unsuccessful Jew, is still deeply rooted, still deeply connected with its original being, the fact that it is a literal piece of God. Amazing. And the fact is that even in the child, in a physical sense, you can see the link, the bond between the toenails and the brain material. How? Because even in the new fetus, the toenails live from the brain. The life of the body comes to the toenails through the brain system, the nervous system, whatever it is. The brain's functioning allows the body to live, allows the body to function. As it says in the Gemara, the Gemara describes all of this. It says, from the white of the father's DNA material, the sinews and the bones and the nails are formed, and there's other things from the mother's material. Shar hachashmal b'seid levushim shel adam rishon began Eden shahayu tzipornaim b'chinas moyach tevuna. That the Eitz Chaim describes in Shar hachashmal that the garments of Adam Rishon in Gan Eden were of nails, which are the product of the faculties of the brain, even the nails. That's what we spoke about briefly before. I don't know that I got it exactly correct. So let's just finish filling out the application of this analogy. Exactly so is the case with regards to every nefesh, ruach, and neshama, no matter which level, in the entire Jewish community, the collective Jewish community, which we said earlier is called Knesset Yisrael. Through the descent of the soul, through the unfolding levels of creation, beginning with Atzilos and then Bria and then Yetzira and Asiya, which we'll talk about later. But of course, beginning with Hashem's own wisdom, that everything really emanates from Hashem's wisdom. It's possible that the souls of even the lowest and most callous, spiritually unsuccessful Jews is still the same divine material and nothing other than that original divine material. It's just that it has been developed through its journey across the various levels of creation. Ve'im kol zeh, but again, the same principle applies. Still, even the way that soul is expressed into the body and mind of that simple Jew, it is still a denuk shurais It is still incredibly bonded with what it used to be, which is an expression of the essence of the divine, the supernal wisdom. And then we have to pause here, because the next piece is so very, very important that it requires careful study and great elaboration. But the Alter Rebbe follows through on the analogy. We said in the body of the fetus, the toenails will continue to live from the brain of the child. And that is an indication that even the way the life that came from the parents is now expressed in the toenails of the child, it's still rooted very much in its original being, what it used to be, which is brain material. That's the analogy. What is it in the analog? What is it in the moral of the story? In the moral of the story, it is that even the souls of the most callous and insensitive Jew, most spiritually unsuccessful Jew, their souls, when it is embedded in their bodies on the level of toenails, still they will receive their life and sustenance from the brain, the collective brain of the Jewish people. That means the Torah scholars and the tzaddikim of each generation. The analogy parallels the analog very, very nicely. And that's what we'll talk about when we come back, God willing, next week. We'll talk about the unique connection that is necessary and required between the tzaddikim of the generation, the holy men of the generation, the Torah scholars of the generation, and all of us. And it's very apropos as we approach. We're already within 30 days of celebrating the 71st anniversary of the Rebbe's leadership, and we're preparing ourselves and strengthening ourselves and our connection to the Rebbe, our tzaddik, our root in the spiritual worlds. And with Hashem's help, we'll be successful in learning Tanya and the Rebbe's Torah and bringing Mashiach now, so that we don't have to celebrate this 71st anniversary without him among us physically. Thank you very much for joining. Now we will unmute the microphones, and you are welcome to ask many questions as you